So on the stage we have Kairsty Wilson and Steve Hurd. Welcome. Make them welcome. I'd like to start with you, Kairsty, and because you really ran this incredible case that required enormous amounts of stamina against the Australian Disability Enterprises in 2002. Can you just give us, when we first talked about it, it took ages. I want the short version, please.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I guess back in 2002, when I first heard about the particular issues in Australian Disability Enterprises, or business services as they were then, the employees were called consumers or clients, and I was just horrified. It just made them sound as if they were throwaway. And so thought, well, one, we needed to change that, and that was changed. They are now recognised as employees with nearly all the employee rights that most of us enjoy. But what they didn't get was the wages, and that was a real issue. And some of the workers were getting 5 cents a day, $1 a day, a couple of dollars a week, and that's wrong. We in Australia have award wages, we have minimum wages, and we thought that needed to happen. And so we started campaigning in regards to the wages, and then in 2004 a wage tool was introduced to the ADEs as we call them now, and what that did was basically divide the wages in half. So they'd start off with the minimum wage, they were assessed on their productivity and also on their competencies, and things like, what meetings does your boss go to? If you got that wrong, and as if how many people know what meetings their boss goes to, they would get 0 for that section, which means that they would lose a percentage of their wage. So effectively they were losing, a lot of them were losing half of their wage, because they'd be assessed with their productivity, so say that was 50%, but they got 0 for competencies. You'd divide that in half and they'd end up with perhaps, say, $2.50 an hour. We had one client on 33 cents an hour, which is just outrageous. So we attempted to get the Commission, the Industrial Relations Commission, to put a stop to that tool, but we were not successful with that, with everybody consenting to it except for us. So we then put in a complaint through the DDA, and obviously that didn't settle. And this was on behalf of a couple of our clients, Gordon Pryor, who's from Horsham, and Michael Nogin from Coffs Harbour. And for Michael, his mother came to us and said, "This is just a joke. I don't want Michael being assessed in such a way that it was just so degrading." And Gordon came himself and said, "I want decent wages, I work hard and I deserve more." So the complaints were put in, didn't settle, so we then went to the federal court. The judge at the first instance, we were unsuccessful, and his reaction was, well, it is hard working with people with disabilities, so therefore that's okay, we'll allow that to happen. So we then appealed that decision and we were successful. So 2 of the judges were in favour of what we were saying, the other one wasn't. So the government, who was the respondent in this matter, then sought leave to the High Court, so the top court of Australia, to say, we want to be able to appeal the decision of the Court of Appeal. They weren't successful, and it was unanimous. So all 3 judges in the High Court said no, the decision of the Federal Court of Appeal stands. So effectively what that meant was that this tool that we were saying was discriminatory, so were the judges. And so this was back in December 2012, and the government did stop using the tool, but unfortunately the ADEs continued they couldn't assess with it, but they continued paying with it. Now we're talking about 10,500 people around Australia who, as an outcome of this complaint, with 2 people who came forward, and I mean there were others as well, but we continued on with 2. The impact for all of those workers was that they were saying that the wages that they were getting were discriminatory. They should be being paid better wages. So that's where that case went to. We finished about May 2013. So if you're thinking, like that was nearly 11 years of work to get to that point. We're now September 1st of September 2016, and we are still continuing with aspects of that case.
And getting back payments for people has proved to be incredibly onerous and complicated too, because there's an expectation of people putting in applications where so that none of it is made easy for people, is it?
No, it's not even just... On Tuesday, I was at the federal court in regards to the representative action. The representative action is an attempt to get back pay for all these workers. And it's just been so complicated. The government introduced legislation that initially, first, it was 50% of what they were owed. So if they were owed $1,000, for example, they would get $500. And we're saying, well, no, that's not fair. So what we negotiated through settlement for the representative action was 70%. Now, you'd think, well, they're entitled to 100%, but if you take into account, if you got 100%, it's income, so it's wages, it would be taxed and it would impact on the DSP. We didn't want that to happen, so by agreeing to the 70%, under the legislation, the DSP is not affected, and if there is any tax implication, an additional amount of money will be given to each of the workers. The problem is, many of the workers don't understand what this is about. It's a complicated process. They have to register. Once they register, they get sent some paperwork, some forms, which aren't easy to fill in. They've got to know who their employer was, how much were they paid, how many hours did they work, a whole range of questions which are very difficult to answer. Then, once they get the application in, an offer is made, and the offer is, as I said, 70% of what they're owed. And they're allowed to get legal advice, and they are meant to get financial counselling. Now, one client that we've had who came to us for legal advice in relation to it, that was fine, but I said to her, look, I'll give you I gave her the legal advice, then I said, look, you're going to the financial counsellor, go and speak to them, and then I'll talk to you afterwards to find out if there's any more questions. The next day when I spoke to her, she'd spent all morning on the phone to the ATO and to Centrelink because she was told by the financial counsellor to go and to see whether there's any tax implication on it and whether there's any implication on the DSP. And I said to her, you didn't need to do that because, one, the financial counsellor is meant to be telling you that information because it's in the paperwork. But again, it's the complications that people just don't follow. It's so difficult to understand. And when the workers get the offer, it's pages thick because what happens is that, we're talking about 10 years of back pay, which means that they give a calculation for every week that they have worked. And so you can imagine how thick that paperwork is. And many of them won't understand. And what worries me is that these workers who deserve the money and have worked so hard and the same rights as what every one of us have will not get the money that they're owed because they won't understand the process.
What I see is just layers and layers and layers of discrimination that just heaps upon itself, and there's so little chance for these people to get what they deserve and what's rightfully theirs.
Well, that's right, and there's what adds to it is that's 10,500, but there's around 20,500 workers in ADEs around Australia. There's another 27 tools. So there's one that is straight productivity, which we're arguing is that should be the only tool used. And in the decision by Justice Buchanan, he's said any tool that has competencies in it should not be used to assess these wages. So we've now got 2 more tools at the federal court that we're challenging, and it all just starts again because certainly the employers don't want to give up having to,
having cheap labour, yeah,
effectively, and a lot of people don't understand what the process that we're following, and so it's. a lot of hate mail, a lot of angry people, but what's right and what I believe in strongly is that every single person in Australia, be it with a disability or not, is entitled to an education and employment as well as all the other rights, and that's what we're fighting for, and we'll continue fighting until we get that.
Thank you for that. I hope you're not planning on retiring anytime soon. It sounds like
maybe tomorrow.
No retirement for you. You've still got years, sadly, that it doesn't sound like it's going to resolve in a hurry.
No,
but
I don't think so.
Thank you for giving us some insight into the complexities of that actually very important case. Steve, I'd like to turn to you because you've got experience working in open employment that also was very discriminatory, and ironically it was working in a disability charity.
Yep. And I think, don't know with this...
it'll come on. It'll
okay.
Just keep talking.
Hope everyone can hear. Look, I think what it goes back to, and it relates to what Kairsty said as well, because...
Oh, there's a switch, maybe. Sorry, I think there's a switch here, Steve.
Okay, I thought there might be, I wasn't sure.
There we go.
Okay, is that... Yep, that's better. What this goes back to is the mentality that people have, and this is what we fought in the Penny Group in the 80s, that a disability charity must be good, and that the people that work in disability charities therefore must be good people. And it's an error of logic. And a lot of the people that work in the disability sector are the biggest scum we've ever met. And some of the people that I've heard the long version of what Kairsty has to say, and believe you me, some of the people she's been working with are far worse than the people in the big corporates who actually are often better people. I've worked in open employment. I'll give you a statistic. It's quite the opposite of education in one sense, because people with intellectual disabilities have actually got higher rates of employment, but people with university qualifications are about 50% employed. That's people with disabilities. I heard Terry McCrann, right-wing wanker and so-called columnist of the Murdoch Press.
I'm glad we got you here, Steve. No, you can call it as it is.
I will. Well, this is what he said, and I think you'll all agree with me. He said, I don't know. Where's the taxpayer have to fund this huge free lunch, which is the NDIS? And I thought, mate, you can have my free lunch if you have my disability. But the real statistic is, if we could improve employment for people with disabilities by 10%, 10% of what it is now, improvement by 10%, we would save the economy $43 billion annually. And that's from Deloitte's. And that's a huge $43 billion we'd pay for the NDIS if they just did what the bloody hell we're asking them to. So that's why, I've had discrimination cases. There was one recently with it wasn't discrimination case, it was guide dogs. I think the one thing a lot of disability managers fear above everything else is a person with a disability that could do their job, because they get a sense of threat out of that. They don't feel that superiority they felt coming into the disability sector. And I was a manager at Guide Dogs, and Guide Dogs as an organisation do a fabulous fabulous work. Their staff work above and beyond the call of duty, but their senior managers are on fabulous salaries. And the CEOs of our big charities are getting more than they do in America, proportionately. And yet they tried the same things on me. They asked me to move. I was planning to move to Geelong one day, and with my partner Leanne, and they said, "Oh, would you consider doing that earlier?" Because we were going to do it, but we put it off. I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we're opening up an office in Geelong, and you could manage our NDIS stuff," which I'd been registering their NDIS stuff. So I said, "Okay," and I confirmed it a couple of times. And then further down the track, they made a business decision, as they called it, to make my position redundant. And I said, "Well, what about Geelong?" And the answer I got was, "Oh, well, these things happen." Now, my partner works in Cranbourne in Casey. She loves guide dogs. She has a car, but, she sold her house to make that possible for me to work for guide dogs. And so now she has to travel a lot further, not from Geelong, I might add, to get to work. I took them to Fair Work. They tried all the usual tactics, sending me these letters saying, "Well, you're going to lose. You and your partner might lose your home," and all this sort of stuff, because you're having to pay our costs. And I just wrote back saying, "I've been threatened by experts and you're not very good. You're bluffing." And they were, of course, because I won the case. And, it was... they couldn't make a finding about Geelong, but they actually they knew they were lying about other things because the senior staff were just really angry that I'd done this to them. How dare I question? I should be grateful to them for the fact that they even deigned to give me a job for a while. And so the old biting the hand that feeds you is another thing that, if we challenge, we're just ungrateful. If we're just ungrateful after all these people do for us, we want wages, we want to be treated with equality and things like that. So, yes, Sarah, open employment can be hard. I've currently got a great employer, I might say, fantastic employer. And I've been elected as a councillor, and I've got to say the council have been really good in helping me. So I don't want to be negative because I think there's a lot of positive things happening in the community as well.
But I think when there's negatives, they have to be called out.
Oh, they do, absolutely. Called out for the right-wing wankers they are.
Just quickly before we wrap up, there was just one other thing that you have talked to me about, which is the lack of sort of mentoring and career pathways for people with disabilities in employment.
Well, that's right. The CEO of Guide Dogs Victoria, who I'll name, is Karen Hayes, and she markets herself as the corporate that cares, the mentor for young women who want to succeed in the corporate world. And yet, when I was at Guide Dogs, I didn't get any of this mentoring. My able-bodied counterparts got trips to overseas conferences, study leave, you name it. They got it. I didn't even get a proper computer for 2 years. That was about a month before they made me redundant. So it's crap. A lot of these people who market themselves as the big I am, aren't we wonderful, they're absolute nutter hypocrites, and they should be called out for it. And I think the fact is there hasn't been anywhere near as much work done by big charity to actually mentor people with disabilities. They're the white South Africans of this country. They are the PW Borters of this country because they are the people who are taking all the benefits, taking all the money. They have holiday homes, they have fabulous apartments, they're living fabulous lifestyles, and they're using the misery and suffering of others as rocket fuel for their own success. Well, they can get stuff because that's got to change, and we've got to make that change.
I think that's a really strong call, and absolutely. I think some of the big charities really, have not progressed and, realised that it's 2016, and they really all should be led by people with disabilities at this stage of the game.